So today is January 22nd, 2022. It is a gigantic honor and pleasure to have Sukari Finley on the show. Sukari is someone I have long admired, looked up to for her work, dedication, sacrifice, and just for the person and example she has been to so many. Sukari is someone that has dedicated her entire life from youth to present, to the liberation movement, to the fight against oppression. Sukari is one of the early members of the Black Panther Party in California and has worked with the party nationally, internationally, worked with the Republic of New Afrika, and has continued to struggle, support, and advocate for the freedom of political prisoners. I could go on and on about Sukari, but let's hear directly from Sukari. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It is a true honor to have you on the show.
Thank you.
I guess
be here.
My first question is, when were you born?
Okay. All righty. Well, I'm not really shy about that. I'm kind of encouraged that I am the age that I am. I was born in 1951, December 20th.
And where were you born? I
was born in Birmingham, Alabama. I was raised here where I'm living now on my great-grandfather, who his property. And so I'm back here again since 2019.
And are both sides of your family from Alabama?
Yeah, my father went to Wilberforce and got a degree in divinity, I think, or something that you call it similar to that. My mother, she did, I think pretty much both of them did what most Black people at that time, that was the migration. The migration went on, I think it started back in the 20s and 30s and even right after emancipation. But mother continued it and she finally found a place where she was comfortable. My father landed in Detroit. My mother went to Detroit, New York, and a few other places, and finally ended up in the late 50s, 59 probably, in California, where they would call it the land of milk and honey, where the streets were made of gold. All of that. I guess they were talking about the Golden Gate, huh?
And what part of California did you guys go to?
My mother went to Northern California. Our first location was East Oakland, 23rd and 23rd.
Okay.
23rd Street, 23rd Avenue.
And how did you first get involved in activism?
Oh my goodness. Being that I was raised in Alabama around the time where churches were being bombed, people were being hosed down with waters in Birmingham, Montgomery boycotts were going on. The bus rides, they were bombing buses, they were trashing people at lunch counters. That was what I was born into. So it just, I guess, was the atmosphere. My mother, when she got ready to, she traveled a bit. I stayed with my grandparents at least 3 different times in life, before reaching 9. And living on a farm and living in a all Black community, it was comforting. You know, it was equal. It was separate, but it was equal for us because we got to take care of ourselves. And there was always a doctor. There was always someone there to help build. It was I don't know, it was romantic. You know, to me, it was just, I was a child. It was Wonderland. And I was surrounded by family.
And so did you move with your mom to California when she went to California?
So what happened is we stayed behind and my grandmother brought us a year later. And the thing I think grandmother and them kept saying, but I don't know if they were just using it, but more likely they weren't. They were worried about my disposition and being in the area. So they wanted to hurry up and make sure. So just before September, we got on the train and headed for California. And that was 1960.
And how did you find it how was the transition from living in Alabama to California for you?
It was interesting. I went to an all-black school. Actually, it was called a training school, a colored training school. And so, but you know, you grow up and you learn people. You know, it's a small community. Everybody knows everybody. People have been around each other for at least 2-3 generations. And so when I got ready to come to California, it was a change, but not so much, because just as we got to 23rd, and just as we got to East Oakland, it was transitioning from Italian to African Americans. So there was one Italian girl left in the class. She was kind of new and I was kind of new, so we became friends. But the Italians were moving out, and they had a distinct indifference as well, the ones that was left. And she and I had a project to work on together, but they didn't want that to happen. So, you know, I never got really to play with white kids in Alabama, but there was always plenty of cousins and my brother. But in California, the divides remained. It remained a divide. There were certain areas you couldn't go in, you know, things that you didn't do, even in California.
And then how did you get involved with the Black Panther Party?
Okay, so we moved 3-4 times in California, and we ended up in Berkeley. I went to elementary. The 6th grade was Berkeley, and then I went to junior high, and then Berkeley High. When I got to Berkeley High, I don't know, we heard a lot about Malcolm when we were in junior high. And so we were always discussing, there was this one book he'd done with the mosque, and the Negro was in capital letters, and we was like, you know, we're not no Negroes, you know. But finding out later in history that just about every country or every city or every ethnic group in Africa has the base starts off with Ni or Nine, you know. So then I understand now those sounds, and they don't bother me as much, you know. But anyway, Malcolm wrote a book, and he was the so-called Negro, and I mean, like the whole page, you'd see about 50 or 60 ends on every page, and it was like we didn't really understand Malcolm. So, and plus we were still young. But as we got into the 9th grade, we started understanding Malcolm better, and then we were trying. I joined the organization at Berkeley High, and we were there was a faction. There were different factions. There was the athletes, there was the little socialites, there were the intellectuals, and then there were us, the jazz intellectuals. And so we were trying to decide, did we want to join the Berkeley NAACP, which was kind of radical. And then we decided, well, the folks that went to that meeting decided that that wasn't for us. So then we talked about the Panthers. And I think at that time, the office in West Oakland had just gotten shot up. And I think Bobby and Huey, mainly Huey, was always carrying a shotgun, and not only just a red book, but a law book, because Huey was studying law. And so we decided to join that party. But at that time, Huey had gotten shot in the side, and he was in the hospital. So it was a big community gathering in West Oakland and North Oakland. And so, yeah, it kind of, a lot of us got together and we all went to join the party. It was maybe about 10 of us from our little organization, which was just a social club at high school. And we were just concerned about what was happening with and to us.
And about how old were you?
Ooh, I was going on 15. So I was 14, but I was going to be 15 at the end of the year.
And how did your mother react to you being involved with the Panther Party at 15?
She was pretty good, but at that time, I think starting at about 12, I was ready just to leave her. And so any opportunity I got, I stayed away. And so she got she got used to it around 13, 14. And then when she found out that I was involved with the party, well, in my room was always all the paintings by the artist. I forget the brother right now. And Emory had all kind of beautiful artwork. So I had my room full of artwork. And when we got into the organization, we had political education, two political educations during the week, and one when the paper came out, so that when we sold the paper, we could tell people what the information was. So Mom, I guess, at some point decided to worry about all that. Plus, maybe she needed me to be home with the twins. So she went there and she gave David what for. And not to say that he wasn't very happy with that. So yeah, when I came in, he let me have it.
And when you refer to the artwork, you're referring to Emory Douglas.
Yes.
And you were referring to David. You're referring to David Hilliard.
Yeah, Chief of Staff David Hilliard.
And why was David upset with you?
My mother had called, said that she could have him put under the jail, basically, because of my age.
And had anyone in the Panther Party asked you how old you were?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. Every other day or something. Once a week or somebody asked me. And it changed each time they asked. I mean, they really knew. And I think what they really wanted me to do is be a little more truthful, but that was like the only thing I was not telling the truth about. I just wasn't comfortable letting them know how young I was. And
so were you able to continue to work with a Panther Party at that age?
Yeah, surprisingly, yeah. That's because there were a lot of us my age. And the thing of it was is that we were the foot soldiers. You know, and they gave us, we studied, we trained. The brothers were just coming back from Vietnam. And so we got the benefit of a lot of skills. And the most exciting part was being able to do things that I had no idea I could do. And it wasn't challenging. It was just exciting to learn how to set the paper. And back then we were using those key sets, those letters and stuff, and the ink and all of that. And there was this one guy who was really great doing that. It was the old antique stuff. And so that was one of the things I learned to do. The other thing was distribution, because not only did we have the paper, but we had books and we had tablets. We had everything that we needed to study and some. And we had those things available in the office in national headquarters, which had moved from West Oakland to Berkeley at that time, right across the street from a few other progressive businesses.
And what were Bobby and Huey like?
Oh, wow. Bobby was the greatest, and excuse me for using the term, but that's what it was, storyteller. He could lay things out for you so vividly and with such passion. I mean, and he would mesmerize crowds. Huey was still locked down. David gave you the marching orders. He told you what to do. Eldridge was sort of a philosopher in whatever you call it, in office or something like that. But mainly, he was a spokesperson. Him and Bobby were spokesmen, but Bobby was the one that could just spin the yarn and you'd be there until he stopped. Eldridge was pretty cool, but he was more intellectual. Bobby as well, but he knew how to tell a story.
Wow, that's amazing. And what I'm guessing this was like the mid to the late 60s?
Yeah, this was still around, this was in the 66 to 67.
And
yeah.
you had mentioned some of your roles. Did you have a specific title in the Panther Party, or what were some of your specific roles?
Never, you know, when we were talking about the other day, I thought about it, never got a role except for distribution, you know, and I was assistant in distribution. Some of the first works I got to do was filing, which was driving me nuts. But I was learning to shuffle paper. So, but then they sent me maybe 2 weeks later to Charles R. Gary's office because he was handling Huey's case. And I think just before that in '66, Bobby Hutton was shot down. And so West Oakland was one of the places we stayed, you know, before we settled in Berkeley. So I was familiar with a lot of folks, and he was one of the guys that I knew of. David and all of them were in from West Oakland. And so chief of staff. And so.
And did you have an opportunity to meet Geronimo Pratt, for instance?
Sure. Before I met Geronimo, though, I that same day that David was really upset with me, he had just come in. Oh boy, here goes my mind. The brother from LA, Bunchy
Carter.
Mm-hmm. And so him and David were heading to the office, and David was complaining about what my mother had did and said, and how I hadn't been truthful. And so I was saying, but Chief, you know, and Bunchy jumped in right away and just read me, and you know, pretty much told me to, you know, get around and do what I'm supposed to do, or they were physically going to be engaged. So I was like, okay. So I did what I was supposed to do. But yeah, when we started out filing, then they sent me to Charles Gary's office to copy petitions and to make sure those things were done in a certain way and brought back and distributed. Then it became not only the distribution and setting up the newspaper, getting articles for the newspaper, but I didn't get a title. I just got to work. And like every 2 weeks, they give me something, they'd add something else on, and it was like, how y'all know I know how to do this? And then I was thinking about it the last few days, and I was like, they knew some of my instructors at Berkeley High, because that was one thing that David and them, you know, as much as they wanted us to come work, they wanted us to complete whatever education that we were working on. And so they knew I was in a scholarship program. They knew, I don't know how they knew, but they gave me things. As I think about the stuff that they gave me to do, I was like, yeah, how you know I know how to do this stuff? Yeah, to myself. And I'm thinking, I was like, they knew Richard Navies. He was one of the chairs at Berkeley High for Black Studies. So because Huey and Bobby them started Merritt College, home of the Black Panthers, is what we call it. That's a film my son worked on with David, chief of staff, and they knew my professor.
And it was, I think, in 1966 that Bobby and Huey challenged Merritt College to start the Black Studies program.
Yeah, that was the early part of '66. Yeah, yeah. There's a movie that's out, and if you're lucky, you'll find it. If not, I'll make sure I can let you know where it's located. It's called Merritt College, home of the Black Panther Party, and it tells that whole story. It's really profound.
And Bunchy Carter, I've always, you know, from what I've read and learned, he seemed like he was an incredible organizer. What was your sense of Bunchy Carter?
He was a disciplinarian. That's as close as I got. I heard a lot about him before too, and I was really impressed with who he was as a being. But when I got to meet him, he was a little ferocious. Mm-hmm. He was a little fearsome, yeah. But you know, you listen, so definitely he was an organizer.
Because I always imagined, you know, him and Geronimo Pratt would have been a dynamic duo if, you know, Bunchy wasn't assassinated and Geronimo Pratt wasn't wrongly locked up.
I think Geronimo was like second under him or something like. And Geronimo, I think, used to be a beret, a green beret as well. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, he took special ops, and I never saw them in the room together. Matter of fact, I didn't meet David, and not David. I didn't meet Geronimo until after Prentice Bunchy Carter had been murdered, had been assassinated.
And what was Geronimo like?
Oh wow, well, it was incredible because it was me and this other sister, and David sent us to pick him up, and so we went to the airport and picked up Geronimo. There was supposed to have been a meeting. What happens is when you become a member of the party, you have to come to central headquarters and get trained and learn what is expected, other than and to be cleared to open a chapter. So Geronimo had already was a part of that. So he was just coming up, and there was sort of like, there had to have been at least 20 or 30 other brothers from around the country. And we all met there. We were Geronimo's escort. And so we took care of him the whole time he was there. We made sure that he got to where he had to go and that he was fed, and that, you know, that was our work. It was like 3 or 4 days. And Geronimo was a trained military professional. He never showed out, and he always called me security. So he called me to security up until he passed. He called me security, and I would just laugh because he was the trained warrior, you know. But yeah, Geronimo was him and Khatari lived down the road from each other in Louisiana, up the bayou, and so they became fast friends. I got to meet Katari. I hadn't seen Geronimo in years. This was in 71, maybe even 73. Yeah, because he had been locked down. And oh, matter of fact, when I was still young, my first job was going to San Quentin and following Ruchell's case. They were trying Ruchell in the prison complex. I mean, inside the San Quentin grounds, right there, they had like a little courtroom. And so the party sent me there to keep up with what was going on with Ruchell's case. It was right after everything had happened.
And that's Ruchell Magee.
Yeah, Ruchell Magee. And Jonathan had been murdered. And I got a chance to meet Jonathan, when he attended a fundraiser we were having for him and for his brother, for George Jackson, not the San Quentin Six, but the Soledad brothers. And so he was there, but he was just so focused. He was so solemn. The best I could get out of him was a yes or a no. Would you like something to eat? No. Would you like something to drink? Mm-mm. Can we get to this? Can we get to that? I'm fine. he was not there. And then we find out later why. And he was so young. I think he was either a year younger than I was or a year older. I can't remember, or we might have been the same age. I have to look back and check.
Wow. And you have mentioned Katari. How did you meet Katari?
Geronimo, back in the day, I have to start this real crazy. John Seale, Bobby Seale's brother, had made it to New York, you know, because that's what everybody seemed to like New York a great deal. So a lot of the Central Committee got to travel to New York. And, you know, being in California, I wasn't really impressed with New York quite yet then. You know, it was, you know, it wasn't on my radar. The Bay Area was me. So anyway, oh boy. Geronimo and Afeni started working on Geronimo's case. Now, John Seale had met Afeni in New York, and we were always getting a lot of stuff to do from Central Committee, me and the sister, her name was Jackie Horton. And And so John was always criticizing, how we didn't do this or we didn't do that. And he said, I met this sister in New York and she was running the office and she did this and she did that. She put y'all to shame. And I guess he was trying to make us jealous, but we were like, what? You like something a Black woman did? And he was astonished because he was trying to make us jealous, and we were not. We want to meet her. She impressed you? We definitely want to meet her. So I didn't get to meet her until finally 73, but I knew about her. I knew about her case. I knew about how she was one of the main defendants or the main legal minds behind Panther 21 and Look for Me in a Whirlwind, So yeah, it was amazing to finally meet her. So I got to meet her seeing Geronimo again in San Quentin. When I found out how close Geronimo was, I was like, let me go see Geronimo. I hadn't seen him. So I went to see him and he was like, oh, this is great, but I got enough people on my legal team, and my, and the supporters. And he said, but there's this brother. His name is Katari. And I want you to work on his case. I want you to meet him and see, what's possible. And so that's what I did. Geronimo, as much as he called me his security, he was someone I looked up to always, always.
And I guess, can you tell us a little bit more about Khatari Gaulden?
Oh, for sure. For sure. Very handsome brother. All the sisters were attracted to him, friends and foes alike. But it was enough work. He always had something for you to do. I think that also kind of limited who spent more time with him because he had a job for you. So my job was to take care of his legal direction, and based on how he set it up. So it got so particular that he recommended I bring a recorder so that I could take it back to the lawyer, which was Sally S. Soliday at the time out of San Rafael, out of San Rafael. So Katari was the major player in his case. We followed everything he said do, and it worked out perfectly. But I also know that those brothers worked together as a unit. And so they all studied together. It was quite a unit. It was quite an education. It was these to see all these minds locked up, and you understand why. Because they don't want these men running anything successfully on the streets.
Can you tell us who you're talking about? Who was working together?
Ooh, Ugo Pinell, David Johnson, Fleeta Drumgo, and these were just the names that I knew all the time. There were a bunch of others. There were other brothers behind their little one, even Luis Telemontes, Willie Tate, and I think it's Sunni-Ali. I think it's his name, Sunni-Ali Akoli. I'm not Akoli, but it's Sunni-Ali, I know. And he was one of the only San Quentin Six members that was still incarcerated when they were going through the trial. I'm trying to think of all the other brothers. There were so many. And anytime there was a case, sometimes brothers were imported they would have the guys come and testify. And they would come, and then we would have to make sure they had visitors, and got the right things they needed. It was quite a unit. It was quite a unit. I think back, things are so busy. It was like, it felt like we went 7 days a week, but of course on Tuesdays the prison's not open. But it just felt like we were there every day, because even if we weren't there, we were still working on the case. And
with Katari, was it love at first sight, or how did that come about?
I was fascinated for sure, but I was raising my son, and I was in school. I had about 3 other jobs, but he was the main job. And he made sure that there was a way. And then the other thing was to make sure that the other brothers had someone looking out for them. So I had a lot of work to do. And he marveled. He would say, he said, you could be anything you wanted to be. And I was like, you know, that's really nice, but right now, can we just get this work done? But yeah, so many sisters liked him. So many people loved him. That was one of those times where that was something that, you know, you were just a part of an incredible unit of people, you know, but like he made sure through me, things were ran the way he wanted them ran. So I think that's what made it specifically greater interaction between us, is because he trusted me with what he needed to have done. And Geronimo had sent me to him, so security. So he supported that notion, and we grew to know each other. And I think he asked me to marry, and I was like, sure, because you know you got to get a permission, and ain't nobody gonna give us permission. And you're in maximum security, come on. But my thing was like, we wanted to bring his kids up. So that was politically sound. So I didn't bother. He and the brothers got together and came up with a code, a legal code, where you could marry. And I can't remember the number, but the code basically was for people who had children out of wedlock, and you did not want people to know that the children were born before you married. So that the children weren't born anyway. They don't know what came first, the marriage or the baby. So, but anyway, that was the code he used. And then, so he told me what to do, and I did everything he said do. And we got married at Marin County Courthouse in the jail section with this minister from Glide Memorial. It was incredible. And one of my friends and an agent who was trying to stay, but we got rid of her. So, but anyway, so yeah, so and she didn't know what was going on, so until it was over. And so yeah, he set all of that up.
Wow.
Yeah, quite a legal mind, but it was like a unit. Those guys, they went through everything, especially Ugo and Katari were really close. And I think Geronimo had gotten sent a different way, and his case was taken off. And then Seale was also working on a guy's case it was really tragic. He had just snapped, and they were trying to remove him from the cell, and they were taking him down the stairs, and there was that infamous chokehold, and they broke his windpipe. So that was a case that they were working on. I worked on that case with Sally, and it gave her the opportunity to channel funds, you know, and it was an interesting time. There was so many cases going on.
And then how did you start to get involved in doing work outside of California? So I know you went to the East Coast, you went to Cuba.
Oh, long before when I first got into the party, one of the things they sat us down with was some members from the Bay Area Communist Party, and there was this young sister, and she wanted to send us to work. Then you know they used to do a swap and a training, and then it was cutting down cane. And my thing is like, y'all gonna send us to Cuba, who just had a successful revolution, to chop down cane, to sugar cane? I was like, are you serious? I can understand learning how to use one of those hatchets, not a problem. But cutting down sugar cane, really? That's what my ancestors did? What? So then they thought it over. And at that time, I wasn't ready to go out of the country. The best that you could do is send me down south and back to the West Coast. I was happy. So I didn't end up going to Cuba until there was a youth festival in '78. And we started preparing for it in '74. And so that was a part of it. But also working in the Bay Area, working in Berkeley is international. So we had a lot of folks from different countries, from Colombia, who were struggling for their independence. And folks, I got to understand what Panama and Colombia, that they were once in the United States, divided it and, you know, and claimed what they wanted. And oh, I think about Walter Rodney. They were in, the two names are so close. One is an African country and one is the country in South America.
Talking about Guyana?
Guyana,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Guyana. So yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on there. And then on the campuses, there were a lot of things going on. And we covered for the paper whatever was happening at the UC campus, and even at Merritt College. You know, there was a lot of unrest. Bobby Seale's mother stayed right across the street. She had a house right across the street from Merritt College. And it was like, that was a mecca. That was, South Berkeley was a mecca for working class Blacks. And it was that time in Berkeley all over. There was so much going on. And then there was, of course, the peace movement. There was the Vietnam. It was such an infusion of things going on. There were so many people. It was an international place. So I couldn't help but meet folks from different spiritual backgrounds, philosophies, but mainly we were taught communism. We learned socialism. I felt more akin to socialism. We learned about Patrice Lumumba. We learned about, oh my God, I could go on. Some of my favorite poems. It's so much. So my mind is full of so many different memories that, yeah, it just growing up in the Bay Area, in Berkeley in particular, everything, it was like almost as great as growing up on 125th Street with all the bookstores in New York. Yeah, and that's how Berkeley, Oakland was, and you know, and even distribution, that was our little bookstore. But yeah, it was an infused time, and it had been that way for years.
And I believe in 1978 you traveled to the East Coast and then to Cuba.
Yes, yeah. First to let's see, yeah, first to get ready for Cuba, but just before I got ready to go, Katari decided that he didn't really want me to go, and I said, I've been paying for this for 4 years. What are you talking about? And that I got to cover it, you know, so and so is coming, this is happening, this is happening. So kind of talked him down a little bit. And the kids had come up just before I took the trip. His children, he had 5 kids, 3 of them biologically. The oldest was a daughter. He had a son named after him, Jeffrey, who I think now is still in prison. Hopefully he's on his way home. I got to check in. And then Ernest, his second son, and 2 other children they all had the same mother, and she passed. So we brought them all up to visit him, and so he got to see his family, and that he hadn't seen in a while. And his brother, he had a brother, James Gaulden, and I think that's all I got to meet was James, and yeah, and the children. In his family, yeah. Oh, and I talked with his aunt from Louisiana. But yeah, it was great. Anyway, so I got to go to Cuba, but before going to Cuba, we had to travel. There was only 2 ways you could travel to Cuba at that time because of the embargo. You had to go through either Canada or Mexico. That time we went through Canada. So we came to New York and we hit all the spots that were, you know, a part of the scene of movement. And so they took us to Riverside Church. And then from Riverside Church, we camped out there. Then we went to, starts with the M, Mont something in Canada.
Montreal.
We went to Montreal and we stayed at the airport until the Cuban plane came to pick us up. And we took a bus ride from New York to Montreal. at midnight. So
Hmm.
yeah, it just looked like ink. But yeah, so we spent at least 2-3 days in New York, but mainly just studying and preparing for the trip. We were clustered, and you know, they made sure we ate, and we just kept our wits about us, and we just traveled. We got to Cuba, the festival. It was the youth festival. It was the first youth festival, the World Youth Festival, and 170 plus countries were participating, and it was youth from all around the world. And I was like, wow. I didn't really feel like a youth, but I think I was a youth. I was under 30. But it was fascinating when we got there. And of course, I'm still learning to speak Spanish. So on our bus sign it was broken down to Estados Unidos. But instead of them just writing, you know, the United States, they wrote, you know, because it was many states, we got like 3 or 4 U's and 3 or 4 S's. And I was like, who is this? But and then in Spanish, they break it down. Well, in Cuban, that's how they broke it down, Estados Unidos. And there's a bunch of U's and then a bunch of S's. Or it might have been ES, I don't know. Yeah. So yeah. So we finally got to Cuba. Oh, but before I went to Cuba, Afeni and I had gotten close. And so every opportunity she would ask me to come to New York after, because they were working on the COINTELPRO case. And what happened was we knew about the files, and they kept filing writs to get access to them. So finally got access to them all. But when we got them, they blacked out as many pages as they could. And we had to go through papers that were stacked up to the wall. I got to participate a couple of weeks, but this is what Fannie and them did for years. And it was not just her, it was a bunch, but of course, she was there in the thick of it. It was quite a few people, and they found information on Geronimo's case and many other members of the party and outside the party and other organizations that were a lot of the organizations weren't even violent, considered, or self-defense. They were non-violent, and they had them all included. Every now and then you run across papers that they missed, or someone, you know, for lack of a better thought, you know, had it. And so you got a clear read of what they were doing. So there was some clear evidence of what was happening. They knew where Geronimo was when they charged him with this. They knew he wasn't there. So we got those things going on, and a bunch of attorneys, even though you have those facts still in your face, and you know that from all the different little trials that have been going on lately, they still will rule a whole nother way. But luckily, I think it was like 28 years for Geronimo before he was liberated.
I think Dhoruba bin Wahab was also, you know, it might have been those. I don't know if it was that like cache of documents, but it was, you know, it was the COINTELPRO documents that ended up, you know, that's where he found the fact that he was wrongly convicted.
Him and so many others. The list is endless. I mean, because I remember one time I think the FBI stopped by where I was living 3 different times, and the 3rd time they asked me, did I know who I was, and I was like, nah, never heard of him. But I mean, you know, you stop them at the door, you give them a lawyer's card, and you send them on their way. You know, but they'll still try to push their questions, and they'll go through a list of everybody's name, you know, and it's like a blur, you know. People aren't blurs. People aren't just a name for you to traffic or try to track down or something like that. But anyway, yeah, a lot of folks got some support.
And you mentioned Afeni's name a couple times, just for the sake of the audience. You're referring to Afeni Shakur.
Yes.
And what was your impressions of her?
Oh my goodness. She was stern. She was forceful. She was emphatic. She was a boss. She was I called her Commander because that's how she did. And from time to time, sometimes I let her know what I was going to do. But basically, she made sure you read well. You knew things. She gave me books. I'm still now trying to remember, because I want to go revisit those books. Her daughter, even Pac's punishment was Wall Street Journal. He had to read the journal. That's Tupac, of course. And Set, the same thing, but she didn't really tax Set as badly as she taxed Pac. But she didn't get a pass either.
And then, am I mistaken that during that same trip you met some folks from the Republic of New Afrika, or was that a different?
Yeah, it was the same in 78. Let's see. Yeah, no, before 78. Probably around 76 or something like that, because I had my own little business too, as well as being political. And so they would invite me to do some work there, and we travel around, and we go to weddings, we go to DC to file something or pick up something. And I got to meet some folks that were underground, and let me see. One year I was there. I can't remember if it was before the festival or afterwards. I got to hang out in Harlem. But yeah, one of the lead ups to the We Charge Genocide that was submitted to the UN, that was, I think, primarily folks from the Republic of New Afrika. I got to meet Ahmed Obafemi and spend a lot of time working with him. I worked a great deal with Queen Mother Moore, because it was like a campaign. So there was a series of meetings throughout the city. And for a while, it was like I was the only one that remembered that stuff. And then at one meeting last year, somebody remembered. I was like, thank goodness, somebody else other than me. Because I knew it was well documented, because there was like a booklet. And I ended up taking that booklet to Cuba and submitting it to the Central Committee in Havana. And so that same booklet was also submitted to I forget his name, something Tazim or something like that. So from Tanzania, I don't know if it was Tanzania or another country. He's the one that submitted it to the UN. And we were outside the UN that day, and that had to have been 79. But before that, there were like campaigns leading up to that. We were at the armories, and that was the first time I had gotten to understand what an armory was. But yeah, it was a lot of meetings.
What was Queen Mother Moore like?
Oh my goodness, she was. Oh, it's hard to say. She was. Oh man, she was the kind of person that was not a boaster, but you knew she could, based on who she was and how she'd come up through Marcus Garvey and all. But she was a regal being, and she spoke one time at one of the events, and she said, I didn't know I had to wait for you all to be born for liberation to come. And I couldn't say a word. My mouth dropped. I don't think anyone responded to that. We're like, oh, no. We just shut up. And we just listened to her go on. But she was this statuesque woman, and always had the right thing to say, always understood a situation. I only got to meet her maybe 4 or 5 times best. And most of those times she was speaking, and maybe 2 or 3 times personally, she said something to me, but I was always in awe. But I tried to keep my mouth closed and just listen. She was that kind of her. When she said I had to wait, I didn't realize that was so profound to me that I didn't really get it until I got older and ran into some young folks myself that I look at and I go, wow, I understand what she was saying. but that's what every generation, because of all the setbacks, because of all the challenges, and because of all the flips and turnarounds and the disappointments and things like that, you see younger people coming out with that fresh and that same zeal, and they're on top of it, and they're where you think it should be, and so whenever I see or hear that, she comes to mind always. She's never far from my mind. And I got to meet her. Afeni introduced me to New York. She introduced me to the West Coast. I mean, the West Coast, to the East Coast. And yeah, and I helped her embrace the West Coast. But also, I was trying to think something else just helped. Anyway, maybe I'll come up with something you said. I was just thinking about something that I had left out.
Yeah, the moment you remember it, feel free to just jump in and say it. Going back to, I think it was the summer of 1978. What were your impression of Cuba?
Oh my goodness. Ay, qué linda es Cuba. Cuba is beautiful. I got into the water when I got there, and I'm expecting it to be cold Pacific, but some parts of the Pacific it's not so cold. Just one specific area, and got in the water, and it was healing. It was healing. I was getting like, I think, little rashes from the heat, and I got in that water, and I came out. My skin was pristine. It was beautiful. I was 20 something, so skin wasn't gonna be real bad in the first place, but I was getting little spots and stuff, I guess, from the humidity and stuff, and got in that water, and beautiful. And part of our trip there was we had different meetings. We had bilaterals, we had trilateral meetings with all the different countries that participated. I got to see ZANU and ZAPU from South Africa. We got to mess with some of the folks from Zambia. Some of the people had just come over from Vietnam, and there was a bilateral between the Viet Cong and the brothers who fought in that war, and that was a tear fest. I mean, like, I didn't expect these military men and these supposedly Viet Cong types. I mean, these were small people, but they were fierce. Oh man, it was being in Cuba, and then Havana, and walking along that embankment and seeing the Medicone. I didn't want to, because sometimes it's a twist with that word. So anyway, yeah, walking along that, it was spectacular, and of course they had a festival. So, but I was so busy. Let's see. We got there on the 25th of June. On August 1st, I came back in from a meeting, a bilateral, trilateral, something like that. And they pulled me into the office, and I was like, well, I must have been too rowdy, so here I'm finna get red, because they were always trying, calm down, but anyway, so I go in the office, they sit me down, and they tell me that my husband, August 1st, is dead. And Afeni calls me. And my thing is, wow, because when Afeni want to reach you, she will get you. So she got through. She was the first person I spoke to. And then I called the prison, and they seemed shocked to hear me. And but anyway, I think Sally, I saw that she was already on top of it. My girlfriend. It was impactful. It seemed like everything just shut down, and it took me 6 days to leave. It took me 6 days, yeah, because they had to get the paperwork together. Yeah, so it took 6 days. I didn't get back to California until the 6th of August. Yeah,
that part must have been awful.
It was.
I would have wanted to swim. I would have been ready to swim back.
Well, they let me, they gave me a room to myself. And I didn't realize that I needed one until I got one. And then So I stayed clustered for a while, and everyone kept in touch with me from the States, you know, just to let me know what was happening and what wasn't happening. And then when I got back, I got all the reports of how and what possible happened. There were like 3 direct things, but the last thing I wanted to hear was how it had happened. But that was something you have to hear, you know. So I heard that, and then and how, yeah, and I had to claim his body and get it prepared and get the children up.
My understanding is that the prison conditions for Katari were horrific.
Oh yeah, that was one of the cases we had. Oh man, we had 3 cases. We had to try them one at a time. So we had to start from the most recent and work back. Khatari ended at San Quentin. I'm trying to remember where he had come from. It wasn't so that I have to go back through paperwork. He had
Maybe
gotten
Vacaville, maybe Vacaville.
Maybe, but for some reason, it may have been Vacaville. I'm not real certain, but anyway, he caught a case. I think it might have been Vacaville. He caught a case where supposedly he murdered a civilian in a laundry room, and the supervisor or something like that. So that was one of the cases. The case before that is Katari committed a crime that he ended up with a year, just like pretty much George and a lot of other guys. So he caught that case. His mother passed. He wanted to go to his service. They wouldn't let him go, so he left and went to his mother's service. And so when they caught him, they gave him a year and a date and the extra time. So then, while that case was happening, you know, he got this case with the civilian supervisor. And so that was the case. And then he ended up Quentin. And at Quentin, they did some funny stuff, trying to break in a new recruit. And the guy got caught up because they shut the gate. And so sometimes the way those things happen, you get ready for an assault. You know, usually it's some other inmates or some guards or somebody that, you know, so anyway, Katari was ready. So he grabbed that guy and that was his shield. So that was the case he caught. So that case we won just before he passed. Just before I went to Cuba, we won that case. And we were getting ready to strike down the others. So yeah. Katari was kept in maximum security, a strip search. You cannot leave that. He was in there 23 hours out of 24 a day. And then he'd be let out in a yard in a little cement encased barbed wire kind of thingy. And he would be out there. That was his yard time. Other than that, he was locked up 24/7. Katari wrote some poems. One of the poems he wrote was watching a rose grow through all that concrete at San Quentin. Just a little crack, it grew up. And I always see that rose. Pac did a song similar to that. And, you know, just it's still, it's one of those pictures that just kind of brightens up concrete. It's just like, wow. But yeah. Katari was, before you come out, he had to strip and then turn around, and they would cuff him from his wrist to his waist, and from his waist to his ankle. And that's how he moved about the prison. And if he went any further out, there were goon squads. Goon squads surrounded him, at least 5 cars visible that you could see. And at each intersection, there would be one. One time, I think we had just left him for a visit, and I guess they were taking him to the hospital. And we left just as they were starting to move. And so we parked a spot on the freeway, and we could see how they had stuff set up. And it was like, are you kidding? This is one man. And Khatari was strong for sure. Those guys were always 2,000 push-ups a day was, I think, was the minimum. And I'm like, seriously, 2,000. So their frame, you know, these guys were strong. These guys were strong. They had to be, because you keep your mind and your body fit, or anything could happen. Anything worse than what was already happening could happen. But yeah, that's how he came out all the time. We gave him some good news one time. I gave him good news one time, and I didn't really want to do it because he was going to rattle his chains. All that excitement, you know, all the idea of completing something and winning. I gave him the news, and it just broke my heart that that's how he got to celebrate. But I had to get beyond me and just deal with what our source was, you know. And so, but Katari, he was always inspirational. He always supported people, but he also, he didn't have a problem giving you some criticism. But yeah, he was very supportive. My son loved him. He loved my son. It was crazy. It was crazy. I asked my son, do you want to be James this or James that? He's like, no, none of that. I said, well, how about Gaulden? He said, oh yeah, I could be James Gaulden.
And so the unit he was in was the SHU, right? The SHU unit?
Security housing unit, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but every time he came out, they would put us in a room with plexiglass and then a little barbed wire, not barbed wire, some kind of mesh. And then it was, earthquakes were happening quite a bit then. And so they would lock me in, they lock him in. So I'm like, why are you locking me in? You know, because the last thing you're going to think about is to come unlock me.
Yeah, that doesn't
during an earthquake. And so they thought about it, you know, they figured out, and they stopped locking me in.
And do you think that did the prison conditions contribute to the way he passed? Yeah,
Katari had very bad, I want to call it emphysema, but it was probably a little more than that. Seasonally, he had to go to the hospital for breathing. And when they took him to the hospital, the goon squad was always the way, like I said, how they traveled with him. Every time, and it would insult the doctors and the nurses and the staffs at the different hospitals. We went to 4 different hospitals, and they didn't never want him to come. They didn't want the guards because they were bullies, and they got in the way of the work that they needed to do for Katari. So that happens seasonally for him. And then sometimes I go to the prison hospital to check on him, you know, when they would bring him back or something like that. And those were the privileges that we managed to have, you know, being married. The warden wasn't going to recognize the marriage, but it was legal. And it was under court seal. So the only way you could get a copy of it to be to file a petition, show cause. Yeah, very interesting. They came up with that. I never heard anything like that in my life until those guys and brothers and Max got together. And I would like to see Katari did it all, and I'm sure he probably did a great deal of it. But though they worked like a unit, it was great just to be a part and to be able to do what they couldn't do physically. And they had, like the San Quentin Six, they had a committee, you know, and then, but I was part of the legal team inside. Basically, we would just make sure what was happening in court. And after Jonathan was murdered, Jonathan and Ruchell, not Jonathan, Ruchell, Jonathan and James, and I forget the other brother's name right now. Anyway, after they put up those metal detectors at the front of the court and then in front of the San Quentin Six trial. And so before you could get in, it was like a 5-minute, go through. And then there was plexiglass in the San Quentin Six case. I don't remember plexiglass in Katari's case or Geronimo's, but in San Quentin Six, there was plexiglass. And sometimes they would come in and you could smell the tear gas. They beat and gassed them. And you could smell it through the plexiglass.
Mm.
And that happened at least 2 or 3 times a month. They would bring them in.